Dan asked us to read a poem, and I find it's something that inspired it, and since Moby Dick inspired it, it's not a poem, and I'm not going to really read that to you. You can seek that out on your own time, but there was a book that was really helpful to me, and half of it is a poem. My character is a man who lives in our world, and he's a white man with a very generic life. He works in an office. His home life is it's getting old, and an office mate gets a DNA test and learns his ancestry, and then he gets the DNA test and comes back that he's Inuit, and he embraces this and goes up and joins a whale hunt. And so this book is called Ancient Land, Sacred Whale, and it's by a British poet. So he kind of did the same thing. He went and he stayed. The whalers are, we think of the Bering Strait as the top of the world, but there's a lot more land above that. And it was as far as I could get and still be in the United States. It was as far as I could get and still be on the planet. But there are people who live there. For 2,000 years people have lived there, and for 1,000 years people have been whaling. And so this book gave me a lot of that ancestral history, and it gave me the mythology and just the communal atmosphere of the people. So I'm going to read a little bit of that and then read from the novel. And this writer, this British poet, is trying to imagine what the stories would have been like, because the storytellers at that time had already died and had been gone for a good 10, 20 years. So this is just a short section of that. An ume leak, I'm not fluent in Nubia, so I'm going to have to fudge a little bit. But this is the person who owns the boat. And the boat is an umyak, which is, it's a frame boat, 8 people could fit in it, and it's seal skins that are stretched over a bone frame, and they go out on the ice, and the ice will, some of it will melt, and they'll go out and hunt whale. And so Umelik is the boat owner. Because animals know what we do in Tiki Aw, they know that ume lakes. If ume lakes are generous, the whales will be generous. On their way to Tiki Aw, before they get here, the whales always stop and they talk to each other. Those who feed the poor and old we'll go to. We'll give them our meat, we'll give them our parkas, but ume lakes who hoard food, who keep whale meat back for themselves, they won't catch us. We'll avoid them. That's how the whale thinks. This section, my main character he's gone up to Alaska, and he's brought his sidekick. The Queequeg is his name Q, and he's just a 17-year-old African-American street kid, and he's brought him along. He's sort of convinced him that he can film it, and the kid wants to be a filmmaker, so he's agreed to do this. They're both quite naive. They don't really know what they're getting into. They're in this section. They're on a charter plane. A Beaver is a small plane with floats on it, and there are wheels under it. So they're about to take off, and the pilot is also a young kid. He's the first Inuit that they've met. The cabin of the Beaver was smaller than inside of a VW Bug, which was about all Jacobs had to compare it with. He had never flown in anything other than a commercial airliner. And this was the first signal that they were leaving the farthest outpost for the last frontier. Inside the cockpit were a hanging rosary and a statuette of St. Christopher. The kid took off his cowboy hat to put on a headset and a pair of mirrored sunglasses before putting the hat back on. Point Halcyon, the kid said in the moments before he fired up the engine. He looked down at his clipboard. There's nothing there. Are you a teacher or something? A missionary? I'm Inuit, Jacob said. The kid scrutinized Jacobs and then looked at Q. Him too? No, he's American. I'm black, Q said. I thought you was Whitey, the pilot said to Jacobs. I don't like Whitey. Nothing personal. None taken, Jacobs said. I thought I was Whitey myself. You could sure pass, the pilot agreed. So why you up here? You a teacher or something? Film crew, Q said. He's my producer. I'm Inuit, Jacobs added. Right, the pilot said. Well, hang on tight. We'll get you there. At the push of a button, the engine coughed, and the propeller turned until the entire plane was shaking, and all they heard was a steady roar. The plane pulled out of the hangar slowly into sunlight, where it slid uneasily on wet ice. They turned and crawled the length of the runway, then turned back and the pilot throttled up. The world outside seemed to vibrate, while the steering wheel shook violently and resisted the kid's grip. Soon they moved along the runway, which was short, and the pilot corrected as they veered sideways. The wheels remained in contact until the last moment, then they rushed toward a line of trees and a pile of snow. Then they gently lifted and tilted back over the small airport. Jacobs held onto his seat and wondered if Q saw him. The Beaver was nothing at all like the jet planes Jacobs had flown in, and he felt the pull of the earth more acutely. He decided he'd never really flown, and the wings of the plane, for just a moment, were an extension of himself. He remembered dreams he'd had as a kid when he could fly by breaststroking in the air. He would swim to climb above a game of tag or to escape the pursuit of a stray dog. His arms and legs pumped and pulled as he lifted higher over his yard, sometimes too high for comfort. And he woke up from the dream the second he realized he couldn't really fly, because it was impossible, and then he tumbled and dropped. Jacobs felt that way now, as if their lifting off the earth was daring and dangerous. Life in the dream, like in the dream, when all he had to do was believe. But if he remembered flying was impossible, they were doomed to fail. Jacobs also had the sense of going back in time to when the frontiers of the globe had been reached and white men turned their thoughts to flight. A time when the technology was unsure and the machines had defied gravity were by no means standard, akin to the beasts ridden before them, machines that needed to be tamed. Then, as they gained the height of clouds, Jacobs knew the pilot would depend entirely on the dials and gauges of his instruments. With the clouds white, the sky white, the ground white, he wondered how bewilderingly white it must all be in the midst of a snowstorm, and figured this young pilot had probably flown in snowy conditions more often than not. Jacobs wondered how many Eskimo words the kid knew for snow he'd flown in, and he decided they were safer with him than any gray-haired commercial airlines Commodore. The kid had experience and knew his flight path. After 3 hours aloft, with the same beautiful rolling scenery, at least when it could be distinguished from white on white, the kid indicated the coastline and beyond it Russia. Point Halcyon looked a lot like the satellite map, with the landing strip completely traversing the tip of the small peninsula, and the runway appeared short from this altitude. The pilot spoke into his headset and started his descent. He held out his index finger near the window to compare his hand to the black land of Point Halcyon that jutted out into the sea ice. They call it Tikiok. It means finger pointing, but they also say it looks like a raven's bill or a harpoon tip. It points to the sea. It points out into the sea, Q said. It's not really land, the pilot said. Point Halcyon was detached from the mainland with lakes and ponds separating Tikiok, and only a thin line of beaches connected it to the coast. The old legend, the pilot continued, is that Tikiok was a whale. The first hunter killed him, and that line of beaches are the harpoon line. They call Point Halcyon the animal. It is alive and also dead. The spirits of whales live there. It's a sacred place. Like the elephant's graveyard, Q said, you'll find whale bones and Inuviat bones, the pilot said. It's the oldest continuously populated village in North America. Tiki-Ok is thousands of years old, and the Inuviat who live there now are descendants. What's the difference, Jacob said, Inuit or Inuviat? I thought you were Inuit, the pilot asked. I am. Inuit is more generalized. We're Inuit all across the Arctic. Inuviat are the people from the North Slope, the whalers. From the air, the town looked modern, rectangular houses laid out in a square grid. What do you want in Tiki-Ok anyway, the pilot said. You a teacher or something? The pilot dipped the plane into a nosedive as he aimed for the short landing strip. With a frozen ocean at both ends, Jacobs had never known a fear of flying, but he'd also never been shown such a clear view of the danger. He felt dizzy and he struggled to breathe. There had been a kind of helplessness throughout most of his life, but the sight of the black, living landmass coming at them put him in the grip of something terrifying. Tiki-Ok was an animal, merciless and unthinking. The place would devour them. Relieved to be on the ground, Jacobs crunched across ice and gravel. He carried his share of gear in a daze. He scanned the white horizon, and the earth seemed a slick black skin in the places where the snow had thawed. He got the impression they walked on the carcass of a long-dead leviathan that once breathed life. Tiki-Ok, the first whale, the animal, was fed whale bones and Inuviat bones for centuries. And Tiki-Ok was hungry. The alien landscape gave Jacobs the uneasy feeling the whale might roll them off its back. Hugh continued to walk with half steps, arms folded. Stop shivering, Jacobs said. I'm fucking freezing. Act Eskimo. What does that even mean? This is the thaw. This should be warm for you. So you're the white guy giving the black guy a trip is wasted. No whaling and no film. Okay, Hugh said. I'll do it for the film, but I'm fucking freezing. Hugh drove a white Jeep Cherokee and wore a white parka. His frame was sturdy, his smile dotted with a golden molar. There were bags of groceries in the front seat of the SUV. Hugh rearranged the gear to fit, and Hugh and John sat on the wide back seat. You're staying with my father, Hugh said. I'm taking you there. There was snow and slush along the roads, and John and Hugh couldn't see through windows that had instantly fogged opaque when the doors were open and the warm air escaped from the Jeep. In a flash, the windows frosted white, and Hugh drove much too fast. They were close to the edge where the land ice met the sea ice, and a strong, steady wind blew in from the expanse of ice-covered water. Hugh passed a small scraper to Hugh, who understood the game, and he cleaned a spot in the middle of his window. When he passed the scraper to Jacobs, who was bemused that Hugh was either too polite or too ballsy to use the scraper first himself, the front windshield blinded with frost. Hugh prodded Jacobs to work quickly, and when Hugh was handed the scraper back, he set it on the dash. Hugh moved the bags of groceries, climbed into the front passenger seat, and scraped the frosted windshield furiously. Hugh saw they would soon drive off the icy gravel road. He calmly corrected their course. Stop scraping, he said. I like to let the defroster do it. You'll leave streaks. They passed a schoolyard where snow blanketed the basketball court. The swing sets were empty, and the kids surrounded a snow whale they had collectively built. A mound of snow that reared up with a characteristic striped smile of a baleen-feeding bowhead whale. The school children took turns hurling a broomstick like a harpoon, and they all cheered when it struck. The celebration is in June, Hugh said. But last year there was no catch. Imagine Christmas without presents, Thanksgiving without turkey, and 4th of July without fireworks combined. It's been hard. Akmook's my father. I will always respect him, but some of us don't get along. Was it his fault? Hugh asked. He's set in his ways, Hugh said, stubborn. Jacob said, he gives the orders, right? He's the old sea captain. You two are his only crew, and you should know, if you go on the water with him, he thinks he's going to save the world with his white whale bullshit. He's suicidal, and it's how he wants to die. He's your father, Jacob said. He's a coconut. Thank you.